I'm spending Hanukkah in Santa Monica. I'm wearing sandals, lighting candles by the sea. Hi, I'm Michael Jublé, and here's a little Hanukkah-themed monologue to mark the occasion. One of the most incredible things about the Jewish story is that there are endless reflections and connections we can mine to bring meaning into our lives wherever and whenever we engage with the past. And I think you'll be surprised to learn how much guilt there is to unwrap in this particular Hanukkah holiday tale. The classic narrative we all know is of the Maccabees' successful rebellion against the Seleucid Empire, which is a fancy name for a branch of Greeks post-Alexander the Great. Shout out to Al. We've talked about this Greek oppressor aspect before on the show with author Dara Horn, who coined the term Hanukkah Antisemitism. That is the Greeks saying, "There's absolutely nothing wrong with you Jews as long as you give up circumcision and Torah and Shabbat and other things that are key components of your Jewish identity. Oppa!" Of course, the parallel to today is obvious, as now, in order to be accepted by the majority in certain leftists and far-right circles, aka the Seleucid Empire, one must renounce their connection to Israel, the very land in which this Hanukkah tale takes place. Now the line is, "There's absolutely nothing wrong with Jews as long as you renounce any and all emotional attachment you may feel to the Jewish homeland or the people who live there." However, there's also a key part of the Hanukkah narrative we don't speak much about, and that's the second front of the Maccabees' fight. The civil war against Hellenized Jews, aka Jews who did relinquish parts of their identity in order to assimilate into and be accepted by the Greek majority. At every high-stakes moment of Jewish history, there have been some Jews willing to give it all up for acceptance. Thus, it would appear to be somewhat unavoidable that some should fall into this trap now, which is disappointing, but also, in a way, kind of reassuring. The anti-Zionist Jews we see today were inevitable in the loop of history and entirely unoriginal. But lest you misunderstand me, I'm pointing this out because I hope to avoid the path of the Maccabees. I do not want a civil war with my fellow Jews. The answer to our schism is not battle. That doesn't serve us in the long run, no matter how satisfying it may feel in the moment. The answer, as hokey as it sounds, is love. We need to look for ways to bring our brothers and sisters in, not bring them down. Or, at the very least, we need to strive to thrive in spite of them, not as a result of their defeat. Now, you may be thinking, F that, the Maccabees won and established their own dynasty. That sounds like a thumbs up to me. Well, the dynasty, the Hasmonean, crumbled, which led to the Romans stepping in, destroying the temple again, and exiling the Jews for millennia. Why did they crumble? Because, like all religious extremists, which is what the Maccabees were, they went too far. Once the true enemies, the Seleucids, were defeated, the Maccabees didn't shift away from an aggression mindset, didn't put down their swords, didn't enact some moderate, inclusive vision of the Jewish future. Rather, they were messianic, zealot priest kings who forced Jewish conversion on their neighbors through violence until infighting and corruption opened the door for Roman conquest. Said another way, you had a Jewish government infused with extreme messianic religious beliefs that led to ill-fated territorial expansion, corruption, civil war, and ultimately collapse, all in the name of Jewish supremacy. Thankfully, this regime was an historical anomaly that the rabbis basically buried from the Hanukkah narrative and which has not repeated itself. Yet. Like the smashing of the bottle at a wedding ceremony to remind us of pain amidst the joy, we must remember that within the triumph and hard-won independence that Hanukkah celebrates, our ancestors also sowed the seeds of their own destruction when they let religious extremism and absolute power go to their heads. A more positive reflection we can take from Hanukkah is in looking at the way it's celebrated today and what that says about us as a people. Most non-Jews assume that since they celebrate Christmas at the same time we celebrate Hanukkah, our holiday is as important to us as theirs is to them. But as most Jews can tell you, it's really not. We don't go to temple to recite a special liturgy. We don't have to stop working like we do on regular biblical holidays. Heck, we don't even eat challah because there's no official festive meal. So why does it carry such weight in the modern Jewish calendar? Because, like the tradition of keeping our lit menorahs in the window, the idea is to make Jewish continuity visible to our neighbors. Hanukkah has meaning because we decided it should, and that is one of my favorite quiet lessons of the holiday, that in Judaism, meaning isn't fixed, it's conferred by us. Hanukkah didn't become central because ancient rabbis elevated it.
but because later Jews needed it. Living as a minority reshapes how Judaism is practiced, and in Christian societies, Jews need rituals that are visible, joyful, and home-centered. Hanukkah fits the bill perfectly. It's portable, non-clerical, and practiced on our windowsills and kitchen tables. It reminds us that cultural centrality isn't necessarily connected to theological weight. There is much more to being Jewish than legal obligation. Judaism is not fixed as an immovable snapshot from 2,000 years ago. It's a living, breathing, never-ending story, and one of our most important traditions is how we adapt old ones and adopt new ones. Speaking of adapting, here's a fun fact. The earliest sources tell us that the first Hanukkah was actually a delayed Sukkot, a holiday the Jews couldn't observe during the fighting, so when the temple was reclaimed, they celebrated it late. 8 days for Sukkot, 8 days for Hanukkah. The takeaway here is that Hanukkah is not simply a celebration of resistance or victory. It's a restoration, a catch-up moment of joy and rededication after disruption and loss. How terribly relevant this idea is to us today, that even when war interrupts the flow of our lives, even when we can't imagine business as usual, Judaism insists we can always return when the chaos abates, still find joy and celebration, still take time to mark what matters, even if it's later than we'd planned for. Another element of Hanukkah that's weirdly resonant today is the humble dreidel. You know, the little spinning top the Jews would use as cover for their Torah study when the Greek soldiers would bust into their homes looking for illegal Jewish activity. Except that didn't happen. The dreidel was a much later addition, likely adapted from European spinning top gambling games, with Hebrew letters and meanings assigned later. You see how easy it is to accept folklore as fact? To embrace a narrative without the slightest skepticism or critical examination? And it's not throwing shade on the dreid, which has become a fun and integral part of the Hanukkah tradition. But let it be a reminder to us of how important it is to question, to excavate ideas before incorporating them into our minds as truth. And last, to wrap things up, present pun intended, the most important part of the Hanukkah story. The miraculous jar of oil that lasted for 8 crazy nights. Except there was no miraculous jar of oil. Not a part of the OG Hanukkah history. The oil miracle actually shows up centuries later in the Talmud, during a very different era of Jewish existence when the temple had been destroyed and our sovereignty was lost. At that point, the Jewish story was no longer about military might and wouldn't be again for thousands of years. Instead, the rabbis shifted the focus from physical dominance to spiritual endurance, from we won to we're here, from fight to light. This Hanukkah, as my family and I light the candles and eat the latkes and spin the European gambling tops, it's that last idea I'll be holding on to. That while success on the battlefield is obviously critical for survival, it is only the means to an end. The real victory, the key to our resilience, is ensuring that our miraculous oil, the Jewish spirit, das pintele yid, that holy spark of goodness in each of us, is what needs to shine most brightly if we want to endure for another 2,000 years. So, Chag Sameach, Happy Hanukkah, and may we all turn our fight into light. This is the 52nd episode of Being Jewish with me, Jonah Platt.